Welcome to Bookbuster Reviews. I'm Casey, and today I'm going to be looking back at my goals for 2025 and setting some new goals for 2026. When I set my goals for 2025, I wanted to focus more on quality than quantity. In Goodreads, I did set a goal for the number of books I wanted to read, but I actually reduced it from the number I'd read in the previous year because I had some specific books that I wanted to read in 2025 that were just a scotch longer than the ones I'd read before. I think I set my goal for like 70 books in 2025, and I've read over 80. So I kind of blew that goal out of the water. But I will admit right here at the top that I did not quite meet the goal that I wanted to hit for the specific books that I wanted to read in 2025. I basically picked 12 books that I wanted to read during 2025, and that's a mix of some classics, some other highly recommended books from BookTube, and overall just kind of longer books. And I did 9 out of the 12, and I'm going to go through those right now. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to set some goals for 2026. I did my list for 2025 in no particular order. I just kind of read them as I felt the whim. I am a mood reader after all, so there's really no rhyme or reason to this order. I'm just going to go through them in the order in which I read them. The first one was Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham. This book I picked up after watching the Chernobyl miniseries on HBO, and then I actually had the opportunity to go tour the Hanford reactor plant in Hanford, Washington. And once I saw that, I kind of had to dig into this book. At some point, I had thought that the HBO miniseries was based on this book, but I guess not. They might have used this book when they were making the documentary, but it wasn't like based on it or anything. A lot of the same characters are in here. But again, it's a true story. So all the characters are real people. The book reads almost like a novel, but it is obviously a true story. You might call it. It's not exactly true crime. It's a history book. Although some might say that the way things went down was criminal and maybe more could have been done, should have been done. But I will say this is a big book. It's over 500 pages, but it is chock full of just unbelievable stories of the people involved in the Chernobyl disaster, whether it was people who were there at the time or people who were investigating it afterwards. It's just an amazing piece of history right here. That I think should not be soon forgotten. And if you've got the time and the patience to get through what is actually a pretty horrible story, I would recommend picking up Midnight in Chernobyl. The next one that I read during this year that was on my list was actually Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is one that I had on my radar for a long time, but for some reason never read. And told my wife that I would, if she was willing to read it with me, I would read it too. And she'd read it before and really enjoyed it. Amazingly enough, I've still not seen any of the movie adaptations of this book, which shocks me since that's usually how I find some of these books. But this is a really fun, touching, heartbreaking story of 4 sisters, which are Meg, Jo, Amy, and Beth. And I actually had I did a written review of this book that got taken off of Amazon because of hate speech, I think, because I can't stand the character of Amy in this book. And if you've read this, you probably know why. The stories of these sisters just spans their lifetimes. The history of the writing of this book is actually pretty interesting too, that she wrote the first half of it and kind of ended it there. And then she was trying to not end it with people just going off and getting married. But then the publisher wanted her to write more because it was so popular. And so she kind of ended up doing exactly what she didn't want to do and writing the rest of the story, which became the second half of Little Women. But yeah, I'm very glad that I read this book. It's very good. Men, women alike I think will enjoy this. Give it a shot. I think it might surprise a lot of people to know that I had never read this next one. And I think it's one that a lot of people read in high school, which was a little bit shocking after I read it. But at any rate, if you haven't read this, you probably should. It is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is exactly what it says in the title. It is about crime and punishment. In this book, we follow Raskolnikov, who has committed a murder. That's the crime. That's no spoiler. That's like right at the beginning of the book. And the rest of the book, we are kind of following an investigator. We're following his life. We're following the life of his friends as he's trying to essentially run away from this crime. He tried to commit the perfect crime to see if he could get away from it. But ultimately, as the story goes on, he gets his punishment, whether that's real or perceived punishment on his part. And this book was so much more accessible than I thought it would be, being Russian literature translated into English for those of us not well spoken in other languages. But it's a gripping novel. And even though this is a fairly long book, I think it's almost 650 pages in this edition, it's still, it's a page turner, which is just weird to say for a book written so long ago. It just seems like it would be a lot slower and drier, but no, this is a book that as you keep turning pages, you're just kind of almost on the edge of your seat as you're reading it. So Crime and Punishment, highly recommended. Over the last couple of years, I've finally seen the light, or the dark as it were, and become a fan of Stephen King. So 2025 was the year of me tackling it. I really didn't know much about this going into it. This is one that I hadn't seen the movies, any of them, before going into it. I knew just what other booktubers have said about it, and I knew about that scene in this book, which I will just say right now was unnecessary, I think, in my humble non-writer opinion. But I will say that if anybody's been holding off reading this book, other than the fact of its size, but just because of that particular scene that we've all heard about, you can skip those pages when you get there, and it doesn't exactly lose anything, I don't think. And it's only like 2 pages out of 1,200, so don't let that scene destroy your thoughts on this. This book, a lot of people say, is super scary. I don't typically get scared when I read books. They're not like, the boo-ah scaring. There's no, jump scares or anything like that for me when I'm reading. I think just because you can kind of see things coming before they do, and just the way the stories are told. It's definitely creepy in places. But what I found mostly was that this is just like a really good coming of age book about these kids, and we get to see them as kids and adults. It's like something like 27 years apart or something like that. And it's just a really neat kind of character study of these kids as they grow up, or, from really just from the time they were kids to the time they were adults. We don't get to see their lives in between as much, but just a good coming of age tale. I have since seen the movies, and the movies themselves, are pretty scary, and they do luckily take out that scene, and I think they did something different there. But the book itself is super good. Again, it's one where you can, it takes a little while to get through it, but just because it's so massive, but it is a really, really good book. Next is another classic that had been on my radar, I think, from a couple other booktubers, just giving their opinions on it and talking about, how it's so good or whatever. And that is Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles. This was a little harder to get through, and part of it was just because of Tess's story, really. It's not a hard read necessarily. It is a little maybe more dry than, say, Crime and Punishment. But this is really like if this was going to be a movie, which I'm sure there's movies and TV show adaptations or whatever about it, but it is just sad. She's had a lot of stuff happen to her in her life, and everything gets blamed on her. This is kind of a feminist book, really, like showing how unfairly she's treated and then blame is put on her for it, and especially things that happen to her. She's essentially victim blamed through it all. And yeah, it was it was really unfair and really difficult to sit with some of the things that happened in this book and the way she was treated afterwards. But it's this is definitely one I think that people should read and just kind of know going in, and maybe even look up some trigger warnings, because there are some scenes in here that are kind of hard to read, hard to get through. But it is definitely worth having the experience, I guess, of reading this book. Another classic, I have been wanting to get into Charles Dickens for a while. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know that A Christmas Carol is my favorite book of all time, but it's really more of a novella. And it occurred to me, I guess going into 2025, that I'd never read anything else by Charles Dickens, and I wanted to remedy that because I really enjoyed his writing in A Christmas Carol. So I thought I'd try something else. And one of the ones that always seems to get recommended is Great Expectations. And so I read it, and it's, you know, a little thinner than some of the other ones, and which makes it a little easier to get through. But this is the story of young Pip, and he's comes from not great upbringing, but then his uncle, or his basically caretaker, gets him a job working for Miss Havisham, which you might have heard that name before. And he ends up falling in love with somebody, and we basically get to kind of grow up with Pip. And I'll say that Miss Havisham doesn't actually have as much to do in the story as we're led to believe going into it. Like, I thought she was going to be a bigger part of it. And she was a big part of it, especially as Pip was being shaped as he was getting brought up. But she's kind of a mysterious person. But Pip's story is just a really great one here. This maybe wasn't as great as I thought that it would have been, just based on some people's recommendations. But I really did enjoy the writing and just the time period. I've said it in my review of A Christmas Carol that if I could time travel back to this time period when Charles Dickens lived and was writing about, I would just love to see that time period, just because just the way he describes things is so great. And it's, again, not as dry as you might think it would be based on how some other classic literature is written. He does go into some minute detail about some things, but again, this is another book that I think is fairly accessible to people. And if you're wanting to get into classic literature, you can't do a whole lot of wrong by reading Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The next one on my list is another one. It's really a trilogy, but it's all part of one major work, and that is The Divine Comedy by Dante. This is another one where it seems like everybody's read Inferno, but no one's read Purgatorio or Paradiso. And I took on the challenge of reading all of it. This is basically, it's an Italian poem that, again, has been translated into English for those of us not skilled in the languages. This was a tough one to get through, partly just because of this one is, even in English, the way that it's written, the speech patterns, it's a poem, so it's not just like dialogue back and forth, but it is a fascinating look at historical views of hell, purgatory, and heaven as written by Dante and as experienced by Dante. I say that in air quotes because the way it's written, if you aren't familiar somehow with it, even just Inferno, Dante basically has a dream in which he is being led through Inferno, through hell, by the poet Virgil, who is an ancient poet who wrote the Aeneid, which was kind of almost like a sequel of sorts to Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. Anyways, he's basically taken on a tour through hell and meets a lot of people along the way who are in hell, and learning about the reasons, and we learn about the circles of hell and the different tiers that there are. And from there they move on to purgatory, where he kind of gets a similar experience, gets to know the geography of purgatory, and again, meeting people who are there. Interestingly, though, Virgil does not take him up to heaven, because Virgil himself was did not make it to heaven, apparently, according to this book. So he meets Beatrice, whoever Beatrice was, I can't remember. And she takes him on a tour through heaven and, gives Dante, again, the geography and the different levels of heaven as he sees them in here. So just a very interesting book to read. It's epic poetry. It's long, it's drawn out, and it's kind of hard to understand, honestly, in some places. But it was a challenge that I took on, and I'm really glad I did, so that I didn't just stop at Inferno. I didn't want to do that. That's what a lot of people do. That's like required reading, it seems like, whether you're in, Catholic school or just in college or even high school, I think sometimes. But getting to read the whole thing start to finish was a really interesting journey to go on with Dante. And also to be able to see where we've gotten a lot of our own views today, our modern views of heaven, hell, and purgatory. So if you're up for the challenge, this was a great edition. This is the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition, translated by Robin Kirkpatrick, and it was actually more understandable than it probably could have been. So any lack of understanding on my part was due to me, not to the translator or to Dante himself. I also took on the challenge this year of reading a book that I've seen all over BookTube as one of the scariest books that people have ever read, and that is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. I don't even know where to begin with this book. Most people who have even heard of this book know that it's a challenge to get through. There's like multiple levels of storytelling in here. There is this kind of found footage video called The Navidson Record about this family that moves into a house only to discover that it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And I think at the beginning, it's only like 1/4 of an inch bigger on the inside, but like they do all these measurements and find out that it is indeed bigger when measured from the inside versus the outside, taking into account wall depth and everything. The one who's actually telling that story is Zampano, who is somebody who had found this video and is kind of not quite transcribing it, but telling this story. And he's got footnotes throughout it and everything. But then the manuscript from Zampano is found by this guy named Johnny Truant, who is now adding his own story into it through the use of additional footnotes. There's like footnotes within footnotes, and it's crazy. And as the story goes on, I mean, you've got some pages that are like almost completely blank, that there's just some text at the bottom, or, just these walls of text. This is part of a footnote. That's pages and pages long. You've got red text. You've got struck through text. Let's see if I can find where it gets even crazier. And you've got some pages with one word on each page, which makes it easier to get through. There's appendices. There's all sorts of things in this book, but the scariest parts of this were from the Navidson Record and some of the adventures, I guess, they go on in some of these additional rooms that appear within the house. And they do get pretty creepy. But to say this is a super scary book, I was actually, I was glad I got through it. It took quite a while, and I admire Danielewski for what he did with this book, but I didn't care for this book. This is one that, a lot of people rate pretty highly. I think I gave this one 2 stars. It's definitely, I can see why a lot of people like it. It wasn't necessarily what I was hoping it would be. But I am glad that I have read it, just because I was curious about this one for a really long time. And I did do a written review on this. You can go to bookbusterreviews.com and you should be able to search and find the review for this, or you can just find me on Goodreads and find my review. But this is not for the average reader. The last book that I made it through in 2025 that was on my list, I actually just finished today, and that is Green River Running Red by Ann Rule. if you're not familiar with Anne Rule, she's a true crime author. She wrote just tons of books. I think this was her 22nd book on true crime cases. She's from the Seattle area, which I grew up around that area. And this is about the Green River Killer, who was kidnapping and killing young women back in the late 80s when I was growing up around there. So this was for my first Anne Rule book, which I can't believe I'd gone this long without reading any of her works. This one I thought was just one that sounded really interesting to me just because I grew up around there. And so I kind of had a passing familiarity with some of the parts of this case. So very, very good book if you're into true crime. Definitely. I mean, I think you could probably pick up anything by Anne Rule and you won't go wrong. But this one was especially gripping for me. Okay. So there were 3 books that I did not get to in 2025 that I wanted to. Just me being a mood reader, I just never got around to them. So I'm adding them to my 2026 list of books, and I've made my list of books shorter, although I think the books themselves have gotten longer. The first one, and again, these are in no particular order. I'll start with the 3 that I just didn't get to in 2025, and I'll try to get through them in 2026. The first one is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I started this one. I probably got a third of the way through. I basically made it to the point where he gets out of prison. And I think this was like the first big book that I tried to read. And I got to a point in it where I really, really enjoyed what I've read so far. But I think it was just the fact that there was so much to go that another book kind of sparked into my mind that I wanted to read. And so I put this one down and kind of never looked back. So I will really intend to pick this one up in 2026. And I'll probably start from where I left off, just because, I mean, I've seen the movie with Jim Caviezel and Guy Pearce. So I kind of know the gist of it. And I remember quite a bit from what I've read already. So I'll probably, start from where I left off, or I might back up just a little bit. But this was a really good from what I read so far. And it seems like every booktuber out there talks about how this is one of their favorite books of all time. So I'm not going to let the size of it get me down this time. I'm just going to work on getting through it. And for some reason, I decided, even though I'd never read anything by Dostoevsky going into 2025, that I was going to put 2 of his books on my list. And part of that was because Crime and Punishment, which I did read, was so popular, so well known. Like, I was somewhat familiar with it, even though I'd never read it. But a lot of people have said the brothers Karamazov is their favorite by Dostoevsky. And, it's another beefy boy. But everything I've heard about this book has made me want to read it. And it's just, I mean, if I had one more month in 2025, this would have been like the next big book I would have gotten into, but just hadn't gotten around to it yet. And I'm really, really looking forward to diving into this one. And the last one that I did not get to in 2025 was one that I think I have marked red on Goodreads, but honestly, I don't remember if I've ever actually finished it. I've started it before, but I don't recall finishing it. And so I thought, I'm going to remedy that. I got myself a new edition of it. Of course, the Penguin Classics edition. And that is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo, for those of us language impaired people. I've seen the Liam Neeson movie. I've never seen the musical. I know it's horrible of me, but I prefer the Liam Neeson Jeffrey Rush movie. What I can remember, I mean, I remember a lot from the movie. The book obviously goes into a lot more detail, but I've read at least the first third of this before too, if not the whole thing. But it is by far the biggest one that I was going to have planned to read or want to read in 2025 that I didn't. This is one of the biggest books I've got on my shelf. It's like 1,400 pages with all the notes and everything. But this is just such an amazing, amazing story. And I think most of us probably know it about Jean Valjean, steals a loaf of bread to feed his family, gets sent to prison, hard labor, gets released, but then is constantly chased for the rest of his life by Javert, who is the inspector that I can't remember if he caught him the first time or if he just has some bee in his bonnet to catch Valjean again. Even though Valjean, for all intents and purposes, turns his life around. This takes place during the French Revolution, and that's about all. I know that this book does get fairly dry, and it is just a horribly depressing book, but this is another one that I fully intend to read even before these next few that I've got on my list here. Definitely want to get to this one sooner rather than later. Okay, so now for the new books. Now I put 12 books on my list for 2025 and it got through 9. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go a little bit easier on myself, and I've got 7 books on my list, of my want to read. But as you've seen from these 3 so far that I've talked about, they're pretty thick books. And the next 4 are no less thick, which is why I'm going with 7 instead of even the 9 that I got through, since those 9, not all of them were super thick. So again, in no particular order, I am going to start with this one, which is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This actually might be one that I get to sooner rather than later. I keep saying that with like all these, but I think it was last year, it might have been 2 years ago, when I read Of Mice and Men, which is like this tiny little book, but it was so good. I loved the writing in that book, and it was just so good. And so last year I read The Grapes of Wrath, and that was one that, most high school students read, but for some reason I never had to, or I just never did. But East of Eden is one that I hear a lot of people say is their favorite John Steinbeck book, and knowing that I love his writing and that I've got 2 of his books that I've really, really enjoyed, I figured I really can't go wrong with this. I think this is kind of considered his grand opus, I don't know if this was his favorite of his own books, but I just love reading books that kind of take place during the same time. I think it's during the Great Depression. But I don't really know anything about this book, what it's about. I assume it takes place in or around or on the way to California, since Steinbeck wrote a lot about that. That's essentially what Grapes of Wrath is. Otherwise, I really don't know anything about this. I'll kind of be going into it blind, and I'm okay with that because I think I will really enjoy it since I enjoyed his other ones. So looking forward to getting into this one. My next beefy one here is another classic, Moby Dick. I really like these Penguin Classic Deluxe editions. I know that some of them I don't have. I just have the standard Classics edition. Like I didn't get the Les Mis Deluxe edition, but I liked that translation a little bit better than the deluxe one. But this is Moby Dick. This was one I think is going to be a little tougher to get through. The people who I know, like on BookTube or just in real life, who have read it really, really like it, even though they admit that it gets incredibly dry. If you ever want to know anything at all about whaling, I guess this is the book you can learn everything, all the ins and outs of whaling, which, I don't care as much about. But I've also just heard that this is just an epically good, great story. And there's pop culture references to this one everywhere. And so I thought, well, it's time I finally give this one a shot. It's long, like all these, but I've got 12 months to get through all these, so we'll see what I can do. All right, these next 2, once I show you one, you'll probably know the other, and maybe I'll just show them both at the same time. War and Peace and Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I think as far as Anna Karenina goes, this is one that I've heard a lot of people say. A lot of people who really enjoy reading Tolstoy say that this is their favorite book. And I think that there are some of the booktubers that I follow that have said that this is like one of their favorite books of all time. And I think, especially after reading Crime and Punishment and just some of the other even just short pieces that I've read from Russian authors, I really do enjoy Russian literature. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into this one. So it's another one I really don't know much about, except it just comes with such high praise from people. And so I'll be effectively going into this one blind. And I'm really looking forward to this. And with War and Peace, this is the one I remember growing up and everyone's always talking about, oh, War and Peace, it's such a big book, which, yeah, it is. This is about 1,400 pages with all the notes and everything, so it's on par with Les Mis. But this is another one that I've heard, people say that it's just so good, and it's not, I feel like when we were growing up, it's like people would talk about War and Peace as just like, oh, what a feat it would be to get through this book. And I mean, sure, yeah. But from everything I've heard about people who've actually read the book and got something out of it, enjoyed it, they enjoyed it. So I think that this is going to be a really epic one to get through. I might actually start with this one before I read Anna Karenina. But we'll see. I'm a mood reader. Have I said that before? I'll get to it when I get to it, and I'll, stick through it to the end. It's hard because I want to read all of these, and I keep saying like, oh, I want to get to this one sooner rather than later, but I kind of mean that with all of these. So that's my list. I've looked back at 2025 on some great books and some not so great ones that I read in 2025. And I've shuffled some of the ones I didn't get to forward to 2026 and added a few more beefy books to my list for 2026. But have you read any of these that I talked about today? And which one do you think I should read next? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe.